dog didn't bark. He leapt straight onto the courtroom table, tore open the sealed evidence folder, and exposed a hidden USB that unraveled the biggest cover-up in the city's history. No one saw it coming, not from a retired canine, not in the middle of a live trial, and definitely not after he'd been presumed dead alongside his handler 7 years earlier. But the truth didn't die. It waited, and the one who carried it back walked on 4 legs. This is the story of a dog who didn't forget, who followed a trail colder than any case file, and who forced the world to look at what it tried to bury. If you're here, welcome. You've just entered the beginning of something real. Stay with us, hit like if your heart's already racing, subscribe if you believe the truth always finds its way back, and tell us where are you watching from and what do you think, was it justice or just the beginning? The rain didn't fall. It poured thick sheets slamming against the courthouse's old stained windows like the heavens were pounding on justice itself. Outside, the city was a blur of headlights and umbrellas. But inside courtroom 12A, time slowed. The air held a tension that wasn't just procedural. It was ancestral heavy. The kind that creeps into your bones like an echo of old verdicts, long sealed. It was the biggest trial the city had seen in a decade. The kind that made headlines bleed and networks interrupted regular programming. People lined the marble corridors for hours hoping for a seat. Not out of civic duty, no. Out of craving for blood, for scandal, for the kind of righteous spectacle only a courtroom can stage. In the third row, far left, seat G7, sat a man. Not the kind that drew attention. No expensive watch, no posture that begged for recognition. Just stillness. Composed. A scar traced his jawline like a half-drawn question mark, barely visible beneath a faded navy hood. His skin held a deep shade of walnut, and his hands, large-veined, rested on the back of a massive German shepherd sitting calmly at his feet. The dog's fur shimmered like wet bronze under the courtroom's cold fluorescent lights. Black along the back, fading to a muddy rust at the legs. A badge clipped to its collar caught the light for a brief moment, and then vanished beneath the fur. He wasn't a defendant. No file bore his name. He wasn't listed among the lawyers or law enforcement. In fact, no one seemed to notice him arrive. He sat without speaking, eyes half-lidded, his hand gently brushing the shepherd's side in rhythmic, thoughtful strokes. Then the courtroom doors opened. The noise shifted, the sort of shuffle that takes place not with feet, but with breath. Everyone inhaled as the prosecutors entered, flanked by security, carrying leather-bound cases like sacred texts. The defense attorneys followed, 2 of them, younger than most expected. Somewhere in the back, cameras clicked aloud only for 30 seconds before the judge would order silence. But even in those few blinks of time, it was clear, this trial wasn't just about guilt. It was about control. But who still had it? And who would lose it today? Judge Marion Coyle entered next, robes trailing slightly behind her, eyes forward, lips tight. She nodded once and took her seat. Court is now in session, came the clerk's voice, sharp and sterile. But even as opening statements were prepared, even as the courtroom settled into its artificial order, something trembled beneath. The dog moved, not much, but enough its ears perked. Its snout twitched, eyes narrowing. Then, a low growl barely audible over the clink of a glass being set on the judge's bench. The man beside him didn't speak, didn't flinch. But his eyes tracked exactly where the shepherd was looking. The evidence table. More specifically, the folder marked Exhibit 4B. It had been laid out moments ago by a bailiff in a hurry, a thick file of sealed transcripts and original depositions. But the dog, the moment its nose caught the scent, had gone still as a predator. No bark, just that low, rolling thunder of a growl, the kind you feel before you hear. And then, for just a second, the man's hands stopped stroking, rested, then gently, deliberately, closed into a fist. The prosecutor began their opening. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we present a case built not just on witness testimony, but on undeniable documentation of collusion, fraud, and obstruction at the highest levels of. But the shepherd was not leave the folder, nor did the man. A few rows ahead, one of the junior clerks glanced back, puzzled by the dog's posture. The judge noticed too, her brows knit briefly, but she moved on. After all, it was just a dog, right? Perhaps a retired service animal. Perhaps PTSD. No one questioned its presence, not yet, but those who noticed the growl remembered it. The sound stayed with them. Later, some would say it had the texture of warning, like a storm at sea, just before the waves begin to rise. The trial rolled on. Motions were read, timelines established, names uttered. The accused, Mr. Darius Vellum, a tech mogul turned political figure, sat behind his attorneys like a statue. His smile carved, eyes unreadable. He didn't glance back at the audience. He never did. Too composed, too sure. But in the third row, seat G7, the man watched him. Not with hatred, not even anger, just certainty, like someone watching a script play out for the second time. The dog's growl faded, but the tension didn't. As the courtroom began its first recess, people stretched, whispered, stood. A woman in pearls leaned over and whispered to her friend, "Do you know who that man is? The one with the dog?" "No idea," came the reply. "But I don't think he's here for the truth." Outside, the rain still slammed the windows. Inside, the dog had not moved an inch. And when the bailiff came to remove the folders for safekeeping, the shepherd's head followed every step. When the judge finally declared a recess, the tension in the room broke like glass under pressure, quietly, but sharp enough to cut the air. People stood, exhaled, whispered, shifted in their seats with that distinct courtroom fatigue, part psychological strain, part caffeine crash. The accused remained still. The prosecutors gathered their notes, flanked by assistants and security. Somewhere behind the glass walls of the observation booth, technicians reset microphones and rechecked time codes. But while the rest of the room stretched and blinked under the harsh overhead fluorescence, the man in seat G7 didn't move. Neither did the dog. Neither did the dog's thinned slightly did he rise, slow and deliberate, keeping one hand low on the shepherd's neck. The moment they stepped into the aisle, the dog pulled not with aggression but with purpose. His nose tilted into the air, nostrils flaring, and then he started moving, weaving between benches. Not fast, not frantic, just... The man followed. No words, no tension in the leash, as if the two had done this hundreds of times before. And they had. Just not here. The dog stopped near the side door. A man in a gray uniform leaned against the frame, typing lazily into a small terminal. His lanyard identified him as evidence control. He looked up briefly, half smiling at the pair approaching, but the smile froze when the dog came to a hard halt in front of him. The shepherd's eyes locked, his shoulders squared. Then, without a bark, without a snarl, he backed away just 2 steps. Then, sat, then repeated the motion. Step forward, nose twitching, then back. Sit, repeat. The man in the gray uniform chuckled awkwardly. "He okay? Is he smelling something on me?" The handler didn't answer. His eyes scanned the man's boots, his gloves, the clipboard tucked under his arm. Then slowly, very slowly, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a laminated card, flashing it just for a second. No badge number, no name, just a symbol, silver embossed, the kind people don't ask about in public buildings. The security clerk's eyes darted toward the nearest surveillance dome, then back to the card. His throat bobbed. The shepherd stepped forward once more, then stopped. This time, he let out a small, guttural whine. The handler's voice was low, firm, almost a whisper. "What's in your pocket?" "Excuse me." "Left side." "What's in your jacket pocket?" Phone." The clerk's hand hovered nervously toward it. "Don't touch it." A beat passed. Then, overhead, the fluorescent lights flickered, not the dim kind that comes from bad wiring, but a full, synchronized pulse. Across the hall, 2 security monitors cut to black simultaneously. The handler noticed. So did the dog. The overhead camera facing the evidence room, once silently blinking red, was now dark. Just for 7 minutes. Exactly 7 minutes. A few attendees checked their watches. Others noticed the screen blackout. "Another tech glitch," someone whispered. "Second one this week." Inside the secure prep area, the prosecutor's assistant adjusted her files. She opened the folder labeled Exhibit 4B and frowned. The pages inside were identical, but something felt off. Too clean, too perfect. No post-its, no handwritten margin notes from the defense review. She glanced toward the empty seat where the lead defense attorney should have been, and found it still vacant. That's when the news... A call whispered, "Urgent." lead defense counsel James Harlan, had been struck in a collision 2 blocks from the courthouse. Hit and run, minor injuries but enough to leave him hospitalized and unavailable. A replacement would arrive shortly, junior counsel from the same firm, but someone who hadn't been fully briefed on the case. Emergency substitution, the judge would call it. Unavoidable, but the man in G7 didn't look surprised. Nor did the dog. Back in the side corridor, the handler stepped close to the uniformed clerk. "What's your name?" "Brett." "Last name?" "Kindler." "Spell it." "Kindler." The handler knelt beside the dog and whispered a command so low only the shepherd could hear. Instantly, the dog turned and walked, not toward the courtroom but toward the service hallway behind the judge's chambers. The handler followed, leaving the clerk frozen. 10 seconds later, the man in gray muttered something, reached into his left pocket, and palmed a small object, a flash drive. He glanced behind him. No one. Then he stepped toward the evidence room, slipped the drive beneath a folder on the table and walked away, eyes forward, shoulders tight. At the exact same moment, 2 floors above, in the surveillance control room, an operator noticed a flicker in the logs. Camera 4B went dark. For how long? 7 minutes, on the dot. Coincidence? Maybe. Log it anyway. Meanwhile, the replacement defense counsel, a young woman named Rachel Mendez, hurried down the stairs, carrying a thin case and 3 color-coded files. Her brow was furrowed. Her voice, when she answered her phone mid-stride, was tense. "I don't know what I'm walking into, just tell me, did we get final access to the unsealed versions?" "Negative," came the reply. "Harlan never logged the last revisions." "God damn it. Rachel, just follow the judge. Don't improvise." Back in the courtroom, as people returned to their seats, the man and the shepherd re-entered silently, settling back into seat G7. The dog sat perfectly still, but his head was angled slightly to the left, toward the evidence bench. His eyes didn't blink. The handler leaned forward just slightly, watching the courtroom fill again like a theater right before curtain. The prosecutor cleared his throat. The defense replacement stood, visibly unprepared, and from the shadows beneath the table, the German shepherd's claws scratched once, then twice, just once more, almost like a signal or a countdown. The moment the German shepherd's claws scraped the floor for the 3rd time, a sudden pulse of memory surged through the man's mind, not sharp like a gunshot, but slow like a flood rising behind the eyes. He didn't blink, didn't move, but something shifted behind his gaze, like a reel of film rolling into motion, playing scenes no one else in that courtroom could see. The walls dissolved, the murmurs disappeared, and all at once he was back there again, in a different suit, with a different badge, under a different name. 7 years ago, the name was Agent Malcolm Red, assigned to internal counter-corruption, operating under a federal task force that didn't officially exist. His mission had been simple on the surface: track the money trail bleeding from public infrastructure contracts into the pockets of high-hanging officials in the Northern Corridor. But nothing about that case had been simple. Not the layers of shell companies, not the embedded assets inside the Justice Department, and especially not the moment he discovered the documents being altered from inside the agency. Documents that, when unsealed, showed his own initials next to wire transfers he had never seen, under dates he had been in another state, with clearance codes above his pay grade. He had known the moment he saw the forged chain of custody that someone was setting him up. But the real proof had been in what followed. Within days of submitting his preliminary report, his badge was revoked, his apartment raided, and his access to the federal systems revoked. And just like that, Agent Red ceased to exist. What remained was a name dragged through the mud. Corrupt federal mole compromises, case escapes prosecution through procedural loopholes. Headlines took less than 24 hours to swallow his career whole. But what no one knew, what never made it to the papers, was what happened the night before the warrant was issued. It had been an abandoned textile mill outside of Baton Rouge. The sting had been planned for 3 weeks. He was working under the radar, no paper trail, deep inside a cartel transport line that had funneled weapons and narcotics straight through government-owned warehouses. And he hadn't been alone. At his side had been a K-9 unit designation Tango 511, codenamed Ghost. German Shepherd, 5 years old at the time, black and tan coat like dried blood at moonlight, a dog too intelligent to be just trained. too instinctive to be replaced by machines. Ghost had done more than sniff out narcotics. He read the energy in a room like a sixth sense, reacting to deception the way other dogs reacted to explosives. That night had been the end of it, or so Malcolm thought. He remembered how quiet it had been, how the moon sliced through the broken rafters like a blade, how Ghost had paused, not barked, just stared into the dark and whined. Seconds later, the gunfire started. Not from the targets inside, but from the perimeter. A double cross. Someone had leaked the op. The shooters weren't a cartel, they were uniformed, federal issue. And they weren't firing to protect, they were clearing house. Ghost took 2 rounds to the flank before Malcolm even had a chance to draw his sidearm. Blood had painted the cement in a single slash as the shepherd twisted and lunged forward, pushing Malcolm down behind a rusted drum. The last thing he remembered clearly was the roar of an explosion, the steel doors bursting open from the inside. Then darkness, then silence. When he woke up 3 days later in a swampy motel with no ID, 2 cracked ribs, and a news report playing on a black and white TV saying he was presumed dead in a botched drug raid, he didn't argue. He let the world think he was gone. Ghost was listed as KIA. The official record was sealed. No recovery attempt, no funeral, just an internal memo stating mission collapsed due to intelligence failure. But Ghost hadn't died. Not really, and neither had Malcolm. He went underground, lived under the radar, moved from town to town, staying away from tech, from news, from anyone with a badge. But even ghosts get restless, especially when the headlines start to rhyme. And today, sitting in courtroom 12A, watching the same pattern of evidence tampering, the same procedural silence, the same 7-minute blackout, it was as if time had curved in on itself. And Ghost? He remembered too. His behavior toward the evidence clerk wasn't instinctual, it was learned, conditioned. A ritual from their training days used to detect explosives and hidden drives. Approach, sniff, step back, snip, repeat. Only for high eyes the signals was urgent. Which meant something about that man in gray wasn't just suspicious, it was familiar. Perhaps one of the handlers from the warehouse op, perhaps someone who knew the code, or someone who'd survived that night too. Malcolm's eyes tracked across the courtroom to the junior attorney now floundering through her case notes. She had just been handed the largest defense of her life, and someone had made sure she was blind. The lead attorney's car accident hadn't been random. And that folder Exhibit 4B was the new version of an old weapon. The weapon that took down Agent Red. His fingers unconsciously ran across the leash in his lap, feeling the braided thread he had stitched himself, the one that held in it a microtag, an encrypted GPS, and a small copper cylinder barely visible to the eye. Insurance. A relic from another life. He glanced at the cameras, still flickering, still glitching. It was happening again, only this time, he wasn't going to vanish into the wreckage. Not again. Ghost shifted beside him, ears pinning back, posture tightening. His gaze locked onto someone else, now an older man in the gallery, dressed like a city councilman but standing too stiffly, scanning the room every few seconds, left hand twitching near his inside coat pocket. Malcolm's jaw tightened. The face was older, heavier, but he knew it. It was Colonel Declan Mears, former Internal Security Liaison, the one who signed off on the Baton Rouge mission, the one who later testified that Malcolm Red had gone rogue. He wasn't just here to watch, he was part of it, and Ghost had seen enough. Malcolm's eyes stayed fixed on Colonel Declan Mears, even as his breathing slowed into the pattern of someone slipping into the same mode he had relied on in the field: stillness before reaction, perception before movement. Ghost didn't growl this time. Instead, the dog's muscles locked, his nose twitching once toward the left side of the courtroom as if catching something the human senses couldn't. Malcolm followed the direction instinctively. That's when he saw it. A clerk walking briskly across the room with a sealed envelope clutched tightly under one arm, and confusion etched all over her face. She was speaking to the prosecutor's assistant in hushed tones, pointing toward the evidence locker, her hands moving fast. The assistant turned pale. It took less than a second for Malcolm to understand what had happened. A key piece of evidence, Exhibit 9D, was gone. Vanished. No checkout log, no surveillance footage. Just like that night in Baton Rouge. Back then it had been a ledger, page 14 to be exact, from a shipment manifest that had connected a city contractor to an offshore account in Belize. When Malcolm went to retrieve it for his final deposition, it was simply he remembered staring at the redacted digital page, feeling that same pit in his gut he felt now. Today, in courtroom 12A, it wasn't page 14. It was a thumb drive supposed to contain internal emails between Vellum's tech firm and several municipal data officers. Emails that, if authentic, proved not only collusion but direct tampering of public service algorithms meant to rig city planning contracts. The drive had been marked as sealed and stored last night under dual custody, but now it was gone. Malcolm leaned back just slightly, his fingers curling around the leash tighter. This wasn't just coincidence. This was the design, and the pattern wasn't theoretical anymore. It was mathematical. Whoever orchestrated his takedown 7 years ago was using the exact same methods today. First, disrupt the legal team, then substitute physical evidence. Finally, compromise the narrative through procedural chaos. The substitution of the defense counsel was no longer unfortunate. It was necessary. It ensured no one would notice the missing drive until it was too late. Malcolm's gaze moved across the courtroom in a slow arc, cataloging faces, postures, glances. Ghost's ears twitched in sync, like antennae drawing signals from invisible frequencies. He whispered under his breath, not to the dog but to himself, "It's the same script, just a new stage." And then he saw it, another crack in the pattern. The junior attorney, Rachel Mendez, was holding up a photocopy of the chain of custody form for Exhibit 9D. Her brow furrowed. She raised it slightly, trembling, and asked the judge for a sidebar. But Judge Coyle waved her off, stating that the court could not break rhythm for minor clerical inconsistencies. That was the third denial in under an hour. Another tactic, he realized. Same as back then, stall any deviation from the narrative. The evidence wasn't just missing, it was supposed to be. By the time anyone official noticed, it would be irrelevant. Just like it had been irrelevant for Malcolm's trial. But this time, Malcolm wasn't on the stand, and Ghost wasn't bleeding on a concrete floor. This time, they were in the audience, watching. And it wasn't just awareness that flickered in Malcolm's eyes now, it was calculation. Because now he saw the layers. The current case, the city's prosecution of a tech magnate for racketeering and systemic data tampering, wasn't just about public manipulation. It was a mirror of the Ghost op from 7 years ago, with better lighting and more camera. The structure was the same, high-value political cover, mid-level scapegoat, misdirected evidence, and just enough procedural distractions to keep the public eye confused. But this wasn't Baton Rouge. This was Metro Court, and this time, they made one mistake. They invited a dead man to the gallery. Malcolm reached into the inside lining of his jacket, pressing 2 fingers into a small hidden pocket. Inside was a microdrive, no larger than a dime. Not the original ledger, those files were long gone, but a packet of intercepted metadata he had salvaged from an old burner phone the night before the explosion. It had never been decrypted fully. But one name had always jumped out. Declan Mears. In connection with a project called Eclipse 07. Not a case. Not a warrant. A program. And now, seeing the judge's subtle cues, the prosecutor's artificial confidence, the clerk's unnatural silence, it clicked. Eclipse 7 wasn't just a misfiled mission. It was a test run. This trial was the rollout. The systemic protocol he once tried to expose had evolved. And this time, instead of targeting one agent, it was reshaping the city's entire judicial algorithm. Through case data manipulation, through digital optimization of legal priorities, through silent deletion of inconvenient truths. And if no one stopped it now today, it wouldn't just destroy another man's life, it would normalize the process. The Ghost let out a short, sharp exhale through his nose and gently tapped Malcolm's knee. A subtle signal. Something was changing. Malcolm followed his gaze. The man in the gray uniform from earlier, the one Ghost had flagged, was exiting the courtroom quietly, carrying a messenger bag slung low to one side. Not suspicious, not hurried, but too invisible for someone in charge of sensitive evidence. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He stood, quietly, and followed him toward the hallway exit. No one noticed. No one ever did. He had been trained that way, to slip between systems, to walk through mechanisms of control without leaving a shadow. But as he reached the glass-paneled doors, A voice echoed behind him. A voice low, grainy, but unmistakable. "I thought you were dead." Malcolm didn't turn around. Not yet. The voice was closer now. "You should have stayed that way." Malcolm didn't need to turn to recognize the voice. It carried the same gravel-thick authority he'd once stood at attention to, 7 years and a lifetime ago, back when the only wars he fought were in classified corridors and shadow-stained warehouses. The man speaking now, Judge Harlan Wexley, had once been Colonel Harlan Wexley, his direct commanding officer during Operation Black Vein, a mission scrubbed from public record but carved in the bones of every man who survived it. Malcolm paused at the door, hand on the push bar, mind flashing through old formations, old orders, and the cold, clipped tone Wexley used when delivering them. He remembered the desert heat, the deafening roar of helicopters, the brief nod before every raid. And he remembered something darker, that final mission, the one that turned into the bloodbath outside Baton Rouge, the one Wexley ordered, the one Wexley abandoned. He turned slowly now, letting the courtroom dissolve into blurred outlines behind him. Wexley was standing near the back wall, arms crossed, robe hanging heavy like a flag of command. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat nothing moved between them. Then Wexley nodded, barely perceptible, almost a flinch, but enough to confirm what Malcolm had already begun to suspect. This wasn't just about covering tracks, this was about command, control. Wexley was part of the circle, and if he had any sense of loyalty left, it had been reassigned to something else a long time ago. But Malcolm didn't speak. He just turned and walked out into the hallway, following the man in the gray uniform. The hallway felt longer than it should have, dimly lit, tiled with soundless floors that seemed to muffle even ghosts' paw steps. The clerk was fast but not running, weaving through doorways and blind corners until he slipped into the stairwell, the door swinging shut just as Malcolm reached it. Ghost didn't bark. He just pressed forward, silent and focused, tail stiff, body low. Malcolm opened the stairwell door gently, empty. No footsteps, no echoes, just the faint smell of vinyl, steel, and something older, burned wires. The clerk had vanished. He took one step down, paused, then turned back. He wasn't going to find the drive. Not here. It was gone. That part of the game had played out exactly as intended. Back inside the courtroom, chaos had begun to bloom. The judge had called another recess short, controlled by the whispers moved faster than the bailiffs. Someone had leaked a message to the press. Less than 5 minutes ago, Rachel Mendez, the junior defense counsel, had received an anonymous tip on her personal phone. No name, just a picture. Her father, bound to a chair, bruised, with a timestamp that matched that morning. She had dropped her legal pad and walked straight out of the courtroom. And now the news was official. The defense had no legal representation. When Judge Coyle re-entered chambers, she was handed a sealed envelope. Its contents were never made public, but after reading it, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes in long, slow circles. Then she addressed the courtroom. "It is with regret that the court acknowledges the official withdrawal of defense representation due to unforeseen personal emergencies. At this time, no substitute counsel has stepped forward." Murmurs exploded, thick and uncontrollable. Court reporters scrambled to update headlines. The prosecution looked smug. Malcolm watched from the back row, jaw clenched, arms crossed, eyes flickering to Wexley, who sat high behind the panel like a god observing chaos he'd engineered. He knew what this meant. Without defense counsel, the trial would proceed in default purpose patterns, silent. As guilt, as it was an old tactic. Let the system eat itself. Let the rules do the dirty work. And no one wanted to step in. 3 public defenders had been contacted. All declined. 2 private firms were approached. Both cited conflict of interest. Not one name on the emergency bar list dared to accept the case. Malcolm understood why. He'd seen the warning signs long before this morning. Anonymous threats. Vehicles keyed. Packages with nothing inside but a single bullet and a digital timestamp. These weren't accidents. They were declarations, and everyone but him. He rose slowly from his seat, adjusting his jacket, patting Ghost's side. That's when Wexley looked down at him again, not with recognition this time, but with calculation, like a man measuring the length of a fuse. Malcolm stared back and gave him nothing. But what chilled him more than Wexley's presence or the missing dryer, even the vacuum of defense counsel, was what he noticed on the judge's bench just before the next motion was read. A file. Tan, unmarked, not in the original docket. It wasn't there earlier, but Malcolm had seen that color before. 7 years ago. Final night, final meeting, final lie. It was the same style of folder used in sealed military tribunals, the ones that weren't meant for city court, the ones labeled eyes only. And it was sitting in front of Wexley now, half open, as if daring someone to ask about it. But no one did. No one ever did. Because everyone in the room, defense or not, was starting to realize this trial wasn't about truth. It was about structure. About how far control could bend justice before it snapped. And just as the judge began to announce the schedule for the next day's proceedings, a sharp, clean sound rang out, a single bark from Ghost, short and clipped. Everyone turned. Everyone froze. Malcolm didn't blink. The bark from Ghost sliced through the courtroom like a sniper shot, clean, sudden, and impossible to ignore. Every head turned in unison, frozen mid-movement, mid-thought, as if the sound alone had stopped time. Judge Coyle paused mid-sentence, the gavel in her hand hovering above the block but not yet dropped. Wexley stiffened. The prosecutors went still, their eyes narrowing toward the back of the room, where Malcolm stood, one hand gently resting on the dog's flank, the other curled into a quiet fist at his side. Ghost's ears were pinned, his stance low but steady, body angled not toward the judge or jury but at the long table near the front, more specifically, at the evidence desk. And then, without warning, the German Shepherd moved. Not a lunge, not a charge, just a burst of precise motion, like a blade drawn clean from its sheath. Before anyone could call out or reach for a command, Ghost had crossed the room in 3 silent strides, leapt the corner barrier and landed squarely on top of the evidence bench. Pandemonium erupted. The bailiff shouted. The stenographer ducked. Coyle stood, but it was already too late. Ghost's front paws slammed into the sealed tan folder marked Exhibit 9D, the very one that had allegedly disappeared hours earlier and somehow, now, was resting calmly among the other labeled exhibits. The seal snapped under the force of his claws, thick paper tearing in 2 loud rips that echoed for the chamber like the snapping of bones. Gasps followed. People stood. Cameras, though not permitted to record, suddenly found themselves being pulled from pockets and bags under desks. Ghost's growl rolled through the stunned silence as he pawed through the opened folder, scattering pages white, crisp, far too clean, the ink too fresh, the spacing too even. Malcolm didn't move. He didn't need to. From beneath the last page, one that fluttered to the floor like a feather dipped in deceit, a small black object rolled out. It bounced once, then again, before stopping inches from the toe of Judge Coyle's pump. Silence descended. All eyes locked onto it. No one breathed. It was a USB stick. Slim, matte black, no markings, no tags, just a faint red LED flickering as if begging to be heard. Ghost stepped back slowly, his job done, and sat down with mechanical calmness, as though nothing had happened at all. The judge blinked. The prosecutors looked like they'd seen a ghost, perhaps because, in a way, they had. Wexley's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking near his temple. Then he spoke for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. "Bailiff, secure that device." But Malcolm's voice cut in low and certain. "Don't touch it. Not unless you want to overwrite what's on it." The judge turned toward him. "You're not counsel. You will." "I know exactly what that is, because I encoded it." The room held its breath. Malcolm stepped forward, slow and measured, eyes locked not on the judge but on the flash drive. He didn't rush, he didn't plead. He moved like a man retrieving evidence from a long-dead battlefield. And in a way he was. The bailiff, uncertain now, looked to Wexley. But the judge didn't speak. Wexley's silence was an answer in itself. Ghost rose and followed Malcolm's side as he knelt beside the bench, picked up the drive carefully and held it up for all to see. "This isn't new," he said, voice steady. "It was filmed 7 years ago, the night of the Baton Rouge operation. The night they said I went rogue." Murmurs erupted. Reporters scribbled. One juror audibly cursed. "This," Malcolm continued, "was taken by a hidden drone my team deployed without command authorization. At the time, I didn't even know it had transmitted successfully. But it did, and it shows exactly what happened inside that warehouse. Judge Coyle stood slowly. This is not the venue for a federal re-examination. Malcolm looked up at her. Your Honor. It's not. But you're not just any judge. You're the one who signed off on the Baton Rouge warrant. You were the junior attorney under Colonel Wexley at the time, overseeing the jurisdictional approval. You knew that mission wasn't clean. And you approved it anyway. She flinched just barely, but enough. Malcolm plugged the USB into the side port of the clerk's desktop computer, bypassing security with a sequence only someone who once worked inside the system could execute. The screen flickered. A loading bar appeared. No one moved. No one stopped him. The video began to play. Low-res footage. Black and white. A warehouse drenched in shadow. Figures moving, tacticals, canine units, armored agents fanning out. Then chaos. Not from the suspects, but from the outer perimeter federal troops, breaching from both ends, firing into their own. Screams, confusion, orders shouted and ignored. Ghosts visible in frame taking a hit, crawling back toward a bleeding figure, Malcolm himself. And then the final frame, Colonel Wexley standing just outside the conflict zone, untouched, speaking into a radio, saying one line with devastating clarity. Let the op collapse. Burn the names. Scrap the asset. The room exploded. Someone screamed. A reporter fainted. Wexley didn't move. He just stared at the screen like it was playing someone else's death. Malcolm stood, voice quiet now. That's what this trial is. A continuation of that protocol. A cleaner version. This wasn't just about Darius Vellum. It was about the system they perfected on me. It's the same file, Your Honor. Just a better printer. And at that moment, a second file ejected from the folder Ghost had torn open. No one noticed until it slid under the prosecutor's table. Ghost stood. Malcolm turned, and someone in the audience began to scream. The scream didn't come from panic, it came from recognition. The kind of primal noise someone makes when the lie they've believed their whole life snaps in two. Malcolm turned toward the sound, already knowing the source before he saw her face. It was the clerk, the same one who handled the evidence seals earlier that morning. Her hand covered her mouth, eyes wide and body frozen. Not from fear of the dog or the chaos, but from the image still playing on the monitor. Everyone's eyes had left the screen for a second to process the initial shock of the Baton Rouge footage. But now it was what came next that paralyzed the room. The screen flickered and then faded into a new timestamp. This one dated just 3 months ago. The image was clearer, cleaner, as if filmed with more deliberate intent. A private office, government seal etched into the glass behind a mahogany desk. A woman sat stiffly across from a man in a dark suit with salt and pepper hair, and hands folded neatly, every gesture precise, every syllable controlled. You will testify that you saw Vellum with the ledger in his hand, the man said, voice calm like someone reviewing weather conditions. The junior attorney shook her head weakly. That night, the Nazis won the battle again. Their firm position never once below the light. Their final Philomanjing openly scowled. The firm will stand behind it. The firm will stand behind you. We just need a narrative that survives the press cycle. Nothing more. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like seismic waves. The camera angle shifted, revealing a second figure seated behind the glass partition. A security officer in uniform, arms crossed. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched the coercion unfold with silent approval. The voice continued. You control the docket, we control the chain of custody. All you need to do is read the lines we give you. After that, you'll be promoted. You'll get out of this dump and into something real. It's a transaction. Everyone walks away cleaner. The video paused on the image of the man leaning forward, a subtle smirk playing at the corner of his lips. And as the lights from the courtroom flickered once again, some unseen stood from the audience. He was sitting in the back row, dressed like any other well-funded bureaucrat, face unreadable, Constance unshaken. The name on his badge, Gregory Lantham, Deputy Director, Federal Oversight Committee. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His smile did the work for him, wide, practiced, and chilling in its certainty. He had been watching the entire proceeding with the patience of a man who believed in inevitability. And now that the mask had cracked, now that his face was finally known, he still didn't break stride. Instead, He adjusted his cufflinks, stepped forward slowly, and tilted his head as if observing an experiment reach its final stage. Malcolm stared at him, heart hammering not in fear, but in fury. In memory, Latham had been on the Baton Rouge dossier, not officially, but Malcolm remembered the signature, a single half-curve in the authorizing line that always leaned left. He had buried that image until now. Now it stood breathing in front of him. "Your Honor," Malcolm said, voice low but hard-edged. "You have the footage. You've seen the manipulation. That man threatened a federal witness into falsifying her testimony. That man compromised the chain of custody. That man is protected under federal immunity," Judge Coyle interrupted, her voice thin, her composure visibly strained. "What you're presenting, while disturbing, has no legal standing without independent verification. The court cannot act on this footage alone." "Then verify it," Malcolm snapped, stepping closer. "Call the technical review team. Let them examine the metadata. Let them confirm the timestamp, the audio, the facial ID." Latham chuckled softly. "And how long would that take, Agent Red?" The use of his real name sent another wave of shock through the room. Malcolm didn't flinch. Latham continued, voice now audible to the entire courtroom. "You think you've stopped something? You've only accelerated it. This system doesn't care about your footage. It doesn't need to. Truth is a currency. We print it." Jurors shifted in their seats, faces pale and confused. Even the court officers looked unsure, glancing at each other, waiting for orders no one seemed willing to give. Malcolm took another step forward. "You threatened a civilian. You destroyed evidence. You falsified testimony. That isn't oversight. That's treason." Latham smiled wider. "And you think you can prove that here?" He spread his arms slightly, as if gesturing toward the courtroom like it was a stage he'd built himself. "This is theater, and every player knows their role. You think because you survived once that you can rewrite the script? You're just the ghost of a chapter we already closed." Latham's gun became a lifeless thing. "Explain how your hands aren't all over this." Latham took another step. "Even if you get the court to acknowledge it, they won't act. You know why? Because no one in this room wants to become you." His words hit like a whip, and they were true. For a moment, silence fell again, thicker than before. The kind of silence that isn't absence of sound, but the compression of every doubt, every fear, every unspoken truth into something heavy and paralyzing. Even Judge Coyle looked down, hands shaking slightly as she reached for her gavel, unsure whether she was ending chaos or enabling it. Then Ghost barked again. Once, and from behind the prosecutor's bench, a different monitor blinked to life. Another video began to play, one no one had queued up, a backup, a second angle. Not from a drone, not from federal archives, from a cell phone, a secret recording, same meeting, same threats, but from behind the glass wall, captured by someone inside the building. Someone who knew the real trial would never take place in court. Latham's smile faded just slightly. His eyes darted to the side, and Malcolm knew in that instant that the truth had gotten further than it ever had before. The second video continued to play on the auxiliary monitor, a raw handheld angle capturing the same coercion, but from behind the glass. Muffled audio but unmistakable images, undeniable contexts. Gasps turned into rising voices, murmurs into shouts. The courtroom no longer felt like a sacred chamber of law, but like a crumbling dam barely holding back the truth. Gregory Latham stood motionless now, hands behind his back, jaw clenched, his eyes no longer arrogant but calculating, his official searching every shadow for a contingency plan. Judge Coyle slammed her gavel once, then twice, each strike louder and more desperate than the last. "Order! This court is in recess pending evidence verification." Bailiffs cleared the room. The jurors were escorted out. Reporters rushed toward the bench, cameras and microphones like weapons raised. But before anyone could fully process what had just unraveled, Malcolm stepped forward, holding the original USB drive in his left hand and the secondary backup in his right. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't look at Wexley or Coyle or Latham. His eyes went straight to the press pool and said more than any verdict ever could. "No, I'm not a party to this case," he began, voice cutting through the noise like steel. "And I know I have no legal standing, no rights to speak here, but rights don't matter when no one honors them. Truth doesn't need permission." The bailiffs moved toward him, Hesitant, confused, caught between protocol and instinct, Malcolm raised both drives above his head. Everything I've said. Everything I've survived. It's in here. Every name, every number, every lie. 7 years of silence ends now. He turned to the press. You want the real story? Follow me. And with that, he walked out of the courtroom, Ghost at his side, past the stunned onlookers, past the bailiffs too slow to stop him, and into the grand marble corridor where sunlight from the dome above painted the floor in fractured white light. Reporters followed. Cameras were live, microphones thrust toward his face. The crowd had shifted from legal observers to witnesses of something else, something unscripted, raw, and real. He reached the top of the front steps, turned toward the forest of microphones, and spoke again. They buried us. Buried the footage, the evidence, the witnesses. They erased the ledger and rewrote the history. But we kept the receipt. He held the drive up once more. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been erased by this machine. And today, he didn't finish the sentence. Because the blow came from the left hard, a baton, metal, straight to the side of the ribs. He gasped, staggered, and another figure came from the right, hooded, gloved fist to jaw, then a sharp crack as a shoulder slammed into his spine. Ghost barked violently, lunging, teeth bared, but a stun baton struck the ground near him, but sparks scattering, forcing the dog back with a whimper. The crowd screamed, cameras jostled, some ran, others filmed. Malcolm dropped to one knee, blood streaming from his mouth, the USB drive still in his hand. One of the assailants reached for it, but Ghost was faster, latching onto the attacker's wrist, clamping down with brutal precision. A flash of blood as the man screamed. Malcolm, coughing now, managed to crawl forward through the chaos. That's when he saw her. A woman in her 30s. No press badge, no mic, just a pen and a small notebook. She wasn't running, she wasn't filming. She was watching calmly, carefully, like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Malcolm met her eyes, and in a single motion slid the drive across the floor toward her. She caught it, stared down. One of the attackers noticed and moved to follow, but Ghost stood between them, growling. Blood still on his jaws, muscles trembling, daring anyone to take a step. Malcolm collapsed. Security finally surged forward, too late, dispersing the crowd, detaining the attackers, faceless men with no ID, no affiliation. Just precise timing and clean hands. Paramedics rushed in. Someone screamed his name. The cameras kept rolling. The footage went viral before the first official statement could be drafted, before the courthouse blood had even been scrubbed from the marble steps, before Malcolm's name could be distorted again by state-run anchors, trying to reframe him as an unstable ex-agent turned rogue activist. The woman who caught the USB, her name was Lila Cho, a freelance investigative journalist with no corporate backing and nothing to lose, had uploaded the files directly to an encrypted mirror server she'd built during her years covering whistleblower cases in Eastern Europe. Within minutes, the raw videos, audio logs, and documentation connected to Project Eclipse 7 flooded the internet, carried by hashtags that jumped from obscure forums into international headlines. Faces were named, orders were traced, and within 48 hours, the very trial that had tried to silence the truth was suspended under emergency federal review. The Department of Justice, backed into a corner by sheer public outcry, was forced to act. A special counsel was appointed. Congressional subpoenas were issued, and for the first time in over a decade, a shadow network that had once buried federal agents in silence found itself dragged into daylight. Judge Coyle was placed under internal investigation. Deputy Director Gregory Lantham resigned without comment. Colonel-turned-Judge Harlan Wexley disappeared from the bench, citing medical leave, though rumors placed him on a private jet bound for a non-extradition country within hours of the video release. 6 other names, previously unknown to the public but linked through metadata and financial trails, were pulled from committee chairs, black site clearances, and advisory roles, stripped of clearance and hauled into closed-door hearings that leaked more than they contained. Protesters flooded the steps of government buildings in 3 major cities, holding up hand-drawn signs with Malcolm Red's face stenciled beneath words like Malcolm. But through it all, through the investigations, the testimonies, the endless news coverage dissecting each frame of the leaked footage, one truth rang louder than any other. No one knew where Malcolm had gone. He'd vanished from the hospital less than 12 hours after emergency surgery. The security footage, reviewed again and again, showed him lying in his bed at 3:07 a.m., monitored by 2 armed guards posted just outside the door. But at 3:12, the guards were found unconscious, slumped in their chairs without any signs of struggle. No forced entry, no camera blind spots, just a 15 gap in the recording. When the nurses entered for his medication round, the bed was empty. The IV hung like a ghost limb. His chart had been taken, his clothing gone. Ghost, the canine, was missing too. No alerts were issued, no APBs. The official statement from the hospital simply read, "Patient discharged under classified authority." But no one believed it. Rumors spun fast that he had been taken by the same people he'd exposed, that he'd staged the entire escape himself, that he was dead and the body had been erased. But Lila Cho received something 2 days later, an envelope with no return address, hand-delivered to her P.O. box in a small town 5 hours from the city. Inside was a single photograph. Ghost sitting in the back of a pickup truck, tongue lolling out, the corner of a familiar scarred hand just barely visible gripping the wheel. No message, no timestamp. Just that. She didn't publish it, she didn't tell anyone. She simply opened a new encrypted folder, tagged it, Red Dawn, and waited. Meanwhile, the investigations gained teeth. Gregory Lantham was brought in under armed escort, though his lawyers stonewalled every question, citing national security, sealed operations, retroactive immunity. The press dubbed him the Smile, a reference to the unshakable smirk he wore through 3 consecutive hearings. That smirk finally cracked when the Committee on Legal Ethics released a second batch of decrypted files from Malcolm's drive files, tying Lantham not only to Project Eclipse 7, but to the financial dissolution of several whistleblower protection programs. The man who once curated narratives had now become one. Judge Coyle, during her preliminary hearing, denied knowledge of any coordination. But a cache of emails from her private account, exposed by a whistleblower within the federal case management system, showed her pushing through backdated judicial orders, bypassing internal review chains, and approving expedited clearance suppressions on multiple related cases, all in the weeks leading to Malcolm's reappearance. She wept on the stand, then went silent. But amid all the names and faces burned by the firestorm, it was Malcolm's absence that haunted the headlines. They called him a martyr, a soldier, a traitor, a ghost. Think pieces debated his methods, his morals, his mental state. Politicians who once voted against transparency bills now praised him as a necessary evil. Former agents came forward, anonymously, echoing similar stories, files that disappeared, careers destroyed, truths altered, the web widened, and yet no one could find him. His bank accounts had been closed years earlier, his fingerprints deleted from the federal database. The only trace left was a dog's muddy paw print found on the floor of the hospital stairwell. Lila Cho received another envelope 7 days later. Inside was a thumb drive and a note scribbled in block letters. "If they erase the wall, write on the stone." She plugged it in. The drive contained terabytes of data, files dated back 12 years, field recordings, encrypted audio logs, surveillance breakdowns of internal corruption units. One file labeled simply, "The Last Trial." She didn't sleep that night. She scheduled a private briefing with 3 international journalists she trusted. One of them asked her quietly, "Do you really think he's alive?" She smiled. "Of course he is." But as she turned off the lights and walked down the hall toward the exit, she didn't see the shadow watching from across the street. Face hidden beneath a dark cap, a dog sitting at his feet, ears perked, waiting for a signal. It happened nearly a year to the day after the courthouse footage first exploded across every major network. After Gregory Lantham's trial ended in a hung jury due to classified evidence. After Judge Coyle quietly resigned citing health reasons. And after Malcolm Red's name had evolved from whispered ghost story to freedom fighter legend, and back into the silence where all dangerous truths eventually settle. The snowstorm had blanketed the mountains for 3 days without pause, swallowing the hiking trails near the northern edge of Glacier Ridge National Park in white silence so thick even rescue drones couldn't cut through it. When the boy went missing, 14 years old, part of a winter camp group, local authorities expected the worst. They sent rangers and K-9 units, helicopters when the winds calmed, but the footprints disappeared 2 miles out, buried beneath fresh snowfall, and the temperature had already dropped below freezing. By the second night, hope had dimmed. Search and rescue prepared to scale back. And then, just past dawn on the third day, a call came through the ranger station from an old forester's watch cabin on the South Ridge. A boy had stumbled in, cold but alive, boots torn, cheeks raw, wrapped in a weather-beaten army blanket. The ranger who took the call said the kid sounded dazed, like someone waking up from a dream they didn't know they were having. When asked how he'd survived, how he'd found shelter in a mountain zone with no active outposts, the boy gave the same answer, over and over. "The dog found me," he said. "A black and tan shepherd, real quiet. Led me out of the woods like he'd done it 100 times before. No collar, no tags, just a scar across one ear like it had once been torn by shrapnel and never fully healed. He knew the way like he was born here. Didn't bark, didn't stop, just kept glancing back to make sure I followed." The rangers brought the boy back to town. Medics checked his vitals. News stations ran the story with the headline, "Mackerel Dog Rescues Lost 10 in Blizzard." But that wasn't the part that caught the attention of those who still remembered the trial. The footage, the scars. It was what the boy said next, sitting on a cot with a nurse holding his hand. His voice calm, certain. "He brought me to a cabin in the tree. There was a man there, black man. Face like stone, tall, quiet. He had a scar down here," the boy pointed to his own jaw, tracing the curve from chin to neck. "He didn't say much, just nodded, gave me water, called the dog captain, told me to follow him back down. Said the dog knew the way better than he did." One of the rangers leaned in. "Did you ask his name?" "Didn't need to," the boy said. "Felt like he'd been up there forever. Like he wasn't hiding, just done waiting." The local sheriff requested a sweep of the cabin the boy described, but when a ranger patrol reached the location 2 days later, there was nothing. No footprints, no smoke, no tools, just a half-buried shovel near a cleared patch of earth, and an old set of tire tracks leading northbound, already half erased by wind. They left it alone after that, but word traveled through online forums, encrypted chat logs, and buried whistleblower channels. The photo Lila Cho had kept locked in her archive was passed to the ranger who first saw the boy, and he confirmed it. Same dog, same scar, same eyes. She never published it, never chased a follow-up. The story had already told itself. In D.C., the final hearings for the Equip 7 inquiry fizzled without indictments. The system had absorbed the truth, then buried it like a virus too dangerous to confront. Malcolm's name was never cleared officially. The files stayed sealed. The monument erected in his name at the steps of the courthouse was made not by the government, but by a group of students from a local university, welded from broken fence rails and recycled brass. They carved one word into the base, witness. Every year on the anniversary, someone leaves a strip of paracord and a folded map at its base. No one knows who, and on a quiet ridge above the tree line where no satellites reach, and only wolves patrol, there is sometimes a flicker of light from a lantern, the sound of boots over snow, and the distant howl of a dog answering the wind. Not lost, but watching, always watching. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. What do you think really happened to Malcolm? Was he right to disappear? And where do you think Ghost will lead us next? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from.